let's take somebody who's right now in the thick of it, of a high intense career, and they're thinking, am I burning out? I don't know what's happening. I'm feeling so overwhelmed. How do I stop this from happening? And I'm going to tap into the wonderful sports psychologist, Bill Beswick. What do you really want? What's really important to you? What are you not willing to sacrifice for that? Which is very different to, what do other people want me to do? How do I do what other people want me to do? How much am I willing to do what other people want me to do?
Welcome to the Burnout Detox Kit podcast. I'm your host, Sophie Theen. I'm an award-winning people and culture executive, keynote speaker, coach, and the founder of the Burnout Detox Project. Now, for more than a decade, I help companies build high-performing teams and cultures across fast-growing businesses. But behind the scenes, I was burning out over and over again. So I saw the side of success nobody talks about openly. So each week, I bring you raw conversations, expert insights, and honest stories that will help you navigate your toxic workplace, rebuild your confidence, and finally understand what success should never demand from you. So if you press play today, it means some part of you is ready for that to change. Wherever you're listening from, welcome. And let's get into today's episode. Well, welcome, Rebecca. Very excited to have you on the show today. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. It feels like we've been planning this for a while, so it's so lovely to finally be in this moment together.
Same here. Well, just to kick us off, some people burn out after years of overworking, but for your story, it's slightly different because this is basically intertwined into your whole lifestyle of what you feel burnout is. That really made me think hard about the times that I've had to go through and trying to associate burnout with my personal life and not just anything that's happening around work, right? So why don't you take us back to what it meant for you?
I came from a background where there was quite a lot of trauma, and really before I started growing and thriving in life, I was dealing with the weight of some pretty tough circumstances, and that really took hold of my body. I remember this one particular day where I was exhausted. I was a young teenager, and I literally felt like I couldn't lift my arms, and I was just crying. And I was diagnosed with things like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia. I was constantly sick. My body was completely burnt out, essentially. And so it's very interesting how where I've ended up in my career and my life now. And I think that's the part of this which it's the part that feels most valuable for me now to speak about when it comes to burnout. So when I came into contact with a very recent experience of working with a startup, we were going full steam ahead. I was giving my all, and the opportunity fell through due to the visa falling through. And in that moment, similar feeling of burnout, that similar feeling of collapse, of not being able to get up. I felt like I was on this rocket ship that suddenly stalled in space. And it's a testament, I think, to the journey that I've been on, what I then did to get from there to here, and what I teach other people to do in terms of a concerted approach to life that takes a very mindful, almost a long view of how to cope with something like burnout or the other things that we're facing in our lives.
It's interesting when you talk about your illness, right? You've always had to cope with it, but it also sounded like, Rebecca, you're someone who has the drive to perform, to succeed, to achieve as well. So how did you kind of curb that when your body is obviously, physically this limitation that is stopping you from doing the maximum or the optimum of yourself? But then at the same time, mentally, clearly you're pushing yourself really hard. You can't control it. So how did you balance that?
Great question. What's really interesting, I suppose the limitations that were put on me when I was younger, what's really interesting is I don't see them now. I actually focus my attention on, let's take like physical performance, for example. So I'm a person who I never thought I could run. I'll never be able to do this. And I started small, and now I've just reached 110-day running streak. And so that drive to push through enables me that on each day that I'm faced with, I ask myself the question of, well, what can I do today? what's the smallest thing that I can still do to meet that bar that means I'll keep moving forwards? And I think that's where the drive and performance now sits with me. I seek to invest consciously in the direction that I want to go in. So there's this term and it's called the athlete's recovery, the drive to perform at work, but also the drive to get back up after we've been knocked down, whether it's by burnout or tragic circumstance in our life. And this is this concept of going and meeting yourself where you are and then working out what you can do to move forwards. I like to call it like maintaining the ship. And so I've asked myself, well, where is that point that I can meet myself? And this is finding where that point is, because I think the temptation when we get burnt out or when we have difficult things happen in our lives, the temptation is to stop. But the problem is when we completely stop, we lose the forward momentum. We lose the motivational investments that will get us out of that burnout. So can I invest in the things today that's going to help me tomorrow? So even though I feel so rubbish today, can I keep maintaining that ship in a way that when this does heal, when I do feel better, when I can get off the floor with more energy, I've already now got that momentum behind me. All the other things, the rest of my body is ready. I'm ready to go. So yeah, that's the athlete's recovery, and that's how I keep moving even when things knock me down.
So you clearly have a very different, perception of how, I wouldn't even call it overcoming burnout. It just seems like, Rebecca, you have integrated it into part of your life that, you've accepted that life is sometimes going to be harder than a different day as compared to a different day, right? It seems like you've got a really good forward momentum mechanism without actually having to overexhaust yourself or overexert yourself until to a point where you can't anymore, which essentially is what happened to a lot of people when they had a burnout. On the other hand, I also don't want to do this anymore because I know it's for me, right? What it seems to sound like is burnout isn't always just like a sudden collapse. It's the quiet unraveling that there is nothing left of you. Let's talk about your most recent crash. What happened?
Yeah, I love that positioning. So in my most recent crash, yeah, I had just given everything. Like you, I had given everything of myself to this job, to this opportunity. And I'd kept going even when I knew that I was really like pushing at those two facets of burnout. We have the motivational resources to keep going. We can keep going. And there's that wonderful phrase from the Nietzsche, like when you have a why, you can withstand any how. So normally I think when we reach that breakout point, you say, I don't want to do this anymore. It's when that why is no longer valid for us, right? And that was in my most recent crash. I'd been working so hard. I had given everything to that. And at that point, it was that feeling of, it was complete disorientation. I'd been quite isolated because I'd been working in the UK from afar with the folks in the States. So I didn't have that support around me. So that's one of the key facets that I would love us to talk about a bit more. But having that support around can be a real protector. It can be a buffer against the really high demands. And also that sense of, meaning in what we're doing. And those two things being taken out, there was this collapse. We can talk about this in a bit, but I've made a concerted effort to invest very consciously in some core areas of my life. And I actually did that because I did a load of research and I was working for a wellbeing company and I was looking at, well, what are these core areas that you would need to invest in each day? And then that's now developed into a tool that I use with the clients that I work with and that I use every single day for myself. And wellbeing is quite an overused term, and obviously there's lots of different ways that people speak about well-being and talk about getting to it, but let's just say like having the wellness and the resources to do the things that we want to do in our lives, right? And feeling like we have the capacity to do that. If we keep putting into that then we can make sure that when things happen and it like smashes, into us or crashes or whatever, that we can quickly get back up to that base level because we've been investing in those core areas up until then. But as anybody who's done any sort of training for any prolonged period of time knows, when you keep investing in your training every day, you find that the dips won't go so far down. They'll start to, and then you'll come back up. And I think that's the biggest lesson, and that's the biggest difference that I've found in my life since I've started to do this very conscious investing each day.
I love what you said just now. Obviously, you're really talking about the fact that you recognize your own limits, but in the meantime, you've been building this. Is it fair to say that you've been building these micro investments in your habit model, right? Way I see it is you've built these micro habits that are so consistent around your lifestyle that when one big thing takes you out, there is always something else small enough that you can fall back onto that's familiar enough, possibly, to make you feel a lot more comfortable. If I probably didn't feel like the burnout would have, you know, wiped me out.
Yeah, it's that difference, isn't it, between the all or nothing. Like naturally as human beings, we can get very much into, yeah, "Oh, I'm gonna do this, or I'm not gonna do nothing, or I'm just gonna sit on the sofa, or I'm gonna work, I'm gonna give absolutely everything at the expense of, as you say, like the only thing we're doing then is grinding at the expense of all these other things, which ironically we're actually doing it for. That's the craziest thing. We're actually grinding for our family, for our relationships, for our health, for our quality of life, for our freedom, for our sense of purpose. Yeah, we're actually doing it for those things, but we get so hyper focused, and that's the other aspect of the habit wheel, of the practice that I have. It's that I'm not just reacting, I'm not just defaulting into the day. I am choosing consciously based on what I've already identified. I'm sure it's like Gary Vaynerchuk who said it. We overestimate what we can do in a year, but we underestimate what we can do in a day. And that's because we just give our days away. But we can choose intentionally how we shape our own days. We can set our own agenda for our days.
I love what you said there. Number one, you don't know when your nervous system is going to collapse if you're not listening to the signs. We all know that, right? But it's so difficult when you're caught up in the moment to just listen to the signs, hear what your body is trying to tell you. Most of the time, we are living under the pretense of someone else's expectations. We can help ourselves achieve micro things for us to know that we are progressing as long as they're directional. But whose expectations are we actually living in? Why and who has told you? Why is there a rule that I must achieve 3 things today? Why can't it be just 1? Why can't it be none today? Right? And I think it's this false expectations that we keep falling into. And then at the same time, there's also this saying that you can't heal in the same environment that broke us. This is precisely what you're saying here. If you know the very thing that has already broken you, then why would you keep doing the same thing?
If we are doing things because of other people, that's extrinsically driven, that is likely to get a result, but it's also likely to be a result that's not necessarily going to give us the thing we think we're actually doing it for, right? Because we can't control other people. You can only ever really focus on the intrinsic side of the equation. Let's say life satisfaction, or actually go after the thing you really want in any way, that fulfillment. Let's take somebody who, so I'm guessing that most people listening to this are going to be people that are either right now in the thick of it, of a high intense career, and they're thinking, am I burning out? I don't know what's happening. I'm feeling so overwhelmed. How do I stop this from happening? And I'm going to tap into the wonderful sports psychologist, Bill Beswick. What do you really want? What's really important to you? I would add on another one on the end, which is, what are you not willing to sacrifice for that?
Yeah, and it's especially important for someone right in the thick of it, stuck in survival mode, not really knowing how to get themselves out of that really bad cycle and feels like they've lost all resources and lost all will. Then it's as simple as starting something really tiny, really meaningful, and ask yourself that question. I think restoring the sense of an agency is ultimately the only thing that would help you realize that is not healthy for you, right?
You should really be in control of how you want your own journey to end and begin. I often think the belief in the narrative, say, that the deck is stacked against you is more damaging than the deck actually being stacked against you. Right? So in other words, if we go to this burnout thing, it is more damaging to think there's nothing I can do to control how the end of this goes. Or I have no agency over what's happening inside me or outside of me. If we start to believe there's nothing we can do, I am burnt out and I have no energy, I can't get myself off the sofa, I can't do any of these things. If we then take that on as this is who I am, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It becomes the learned helplessness. Whereas if we say, okay, yeah, that's true right now, what could I do that might make that different tomorrow?
Even if we feel like we can't, we actually can. We talked a lot about resilience as well, about how, resilience is not just something that is very personal to ourselves. Sometimes circumstances will shape the way you look at resilience. Sometimes, especially workplaces, we talked about how being in the wrong place at the wrong time is actually going to do more damage to you than you actually imagine it to be, right? It doesn't support your well-being. So in your experience, let's talk about the difference between supportive system versus just self-care ones. What I really want to get into is what can we make full use of that is around us versus what we actually build and implement for ourselves.
I love that. And thank you. You've raised such an important half of the equation. We often think like, oh, well, and obviously we've been speaking a lot about how we can make ourselves resilient. But there's a reason why solitary confinement is the most terrible punishment you can give a human being. And that's because we need other people to be healthy and well, to balance our mental and physical states, because it's the investments we make in the people around us is one of those core parts of that. But when we think about the systems themselves, it is a really, really brilliant model. It's it was a collaboration between Sheffield University and a company called Affinity Health at Work. And they made this model called Igloo. And they were looking at well-being at work, about the igloo as like the sort of like the guardian of a person. How clear are the roles that people are doing as a leader or as colleagues? How much support are you providing to each other? Are you actually showing up? Are you making sure that each person feels like they can voice any concerns? Are you making sure that people can cope with the level of demand that they're experiencing, and that you create that open dialogue? What kind of policies and procedures are in place? What is there to protect people? What kind of organization is it? There will be some organizations where, and I really think this is something that needs to be spoken about as well. Let's say like Flight Story, right? Stephen Bartlett makes no apology, and rightly so, to say we work incredibly hard. We want people in the office, and we work incredibly hard. And he is probably the person that works the hardest. When you see his like behind the diary, that's what people are signing up for in that kind of job. Actually, Affinity Health at Work did an incredible participative study with a company, and they did such a small intervention that it sounds like it's like, would that really make a difference? It made a huge difference to well-being. They use Slack. Nobody had ever done any work on refining how the Slack channels were set up, how the communications were coming through, or even how to engage with it. So they did a piece of work that was people, what was the thing that was really absolutely eroding their sense of well-being? And it was the constant influx of messages and needing to be up to date on the messages that was coming through Slack. So there are very simple things that can be done at the organizational level, at the lead level, at the groups to the team level, to make sure that people aren't feeling those.
It's also not easy because, like you said, that not all leaders are directly responsible for the burnout that they cause in their teams, and most of the time, it's harder to say organization X is fully responsible for my burnout, right? On the other hand, it's easier to say, oh, you know what? Going through burnout because of my manager story. So in that case, I totally understand where you're coming from, Rebecca, around this particularly being a myth that leaders are not the only responsible thing that's to break that equation. However, how do we then equip managers with enough tools so that they don't unconsciously kind of damage the situation even more?
It's such a good question. I think the first thing is role model. So we know you can have a leader, or even like say like a parent say, you shouldn't do this. You should, you know, turn your phone off at 5. Don't be online. Don't watch this. Don't do that. Don't. And then the leader like stays there like working until whatever. So they tend to overwork. Then you need to be looking at how to actively do that for you. So that's like the number one thing, and protecting that for you, because whatever you do is what other people will do. As a leader, the more you say, it matters what you do. So that's like absolutely the first thing. Then the second thing is understanding that there are these really simple things like, are you having regular conversations with the person where you open up the floor for them to be able to share with you how, what's happening for them, what their workload is like, what challenges they're having? And one of the things that's very important to people, particularly in a work environment, is what's fair, what we feel is fair. So if, for example, I was to make a decision and I didn't tell you about how I made the decision, and I made a decision which you disagree with, and then I go, maybe that's the decision, so we're going to go with it. The impact on you, that hits on a lack of fairness, and it also will hit on a lack of autonomy and injustice. If, for example, I said, okay, I need to go about making this decision. I'm going to make it in this way, and I'm going to be transparent on how I make that decision. It still doesn't go the way you want, but I deliver it to you in a way where you go, oh yeah, like I feel really respected. So there's a really important point here as leaders in how, not just the conditions that we set up for other people, but how we're operating, how we're role modeling, how we are behaving with the people we're working with, which gives them that sense of we're actually giving them the resources they need rather than taking them away because we don't know how to manage situations and we're shying away from difficult ones.
Makes sense. Like you said, there are so many ways of actually equipping the manager or the leader to know what they need to be doing. But ultimately, it's just understanding that they are there to create the protection layer and the safety net for their teams. And if it's as simple as that. If they can do that via either creating more trust, creating more safety, creating more autonomy within or respect within the team, I love that. So, Rebecca, I always ask this as a last question. For someone who's in the thick of it right now, what is the one simple truth that you would want them to hear?
What's one thing, just one thing they could do that will give themselves the best possible chance of feeling better? And that could just be, I'm gonna call somebody, but it's one intentional act. Because what we find is, I'll go back to that quote again, you underestimate what you can do in a year, overestimate what you can do in a year, but underestimate what you can do in a day. One action today, small investment or vote in the direction that you want to go in, ever it is, one small thing that you do today can make the world of difference in the long term. Because if you keep doing that one little thing, it starts to bank. And then that is a momentum that sustains itself without us having to hold that.
Amazing. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for your time today. I think this is the thing that people really underestimate. So thank you so much for sharing today. You have built this wealth of knowledge and this wealth of understanding about all these things that causes burnout. And we've been very, very lucky to have you. And you remind us that resilience isn't just about pushing harder. And I absolutely love it.
Well, thank you so much. I love that you're doing this. I think it's so valuable. So thank you. Thank you for doing this and having me here. Thank you.
If this episode resonated with you today, make sure to follow and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a conversation as important as this. The Burnout Detox Kit is here to make sure ambitious people like you recover from the burnout without losing themselves in the process. So if you know someone navigating burnout right now, workplace toxicity, even simply trying to hold it all together, share this episode with them. You never know who might need to hear it. I thank you for your courage today, and thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next episode.